This is the story of how I first heard about the Osage Reign of Terror. It's also the story of a man named Daryl, whose grandson Frank told me the story. And it starts off with what Frank called a ghost storm. I'm working in Oklahoma for a month. Boss man unexpectedly gives everyone the next day off. With pay, nice. I'm at my motel that night. Sitting in the doorway, in a little collapsible chair, staring out at the field across from my room. It's late. Everyone else is asleep. I don't remember what I was thinking about, but at some point I hear a storm approaching. I love storms, so I sit there waiting for it. I hear it roll across the field towards me. It comes right up to my doorstep where I'm sitting. There is not a single drop of rain. In fact, the sky is perfectly clear, and I can see the stars. Not a cloud in sight. But I can literally hear what sounds like a heavy rain all around me. I kinda feel something brush past my face as the storm moves over the motel. Then everything goes quiet again. I wasn't spooked, just confused. Ended up concluding that it was probably some natural phenomenon, maybe electrical, because I definitely felt it around my face and hair. Next morning. It's my day off, so I get up late. Decide to hit up a diner down the road for some grub. I miss the breakfast rush, so it's a ghost town in there. Just me and some old man drinking coffee at the counter. He strikes up a conversation with me. Basic small talk bullshit. I mentioned the weird occurrence the night before. Keep in mind I'm still looking for a normal explanation. I asked the guy if he knows what it might have been. He seems interested. Asks me what I heard. I describe the sound to him. I mention how I thought it was a storm at first, but there was no rain. The old guy's looking at me real intently now. He asks if I felt anything. Yeah, I felt something on my face and hair, kinda like walking through spider webs. Long story short, he mentions how there are stories of a ghost storm that passes through the area. People describe it as an intense hissing that sounds just like heavy rainfall. Pretty much exactly what I heard. He says in the stories, the storm passes over the person and that's that. Talk about a lame fucking legend. I'm in Snoresville. But the guy seems interested that I apparently witnessed it. He says most stories are from long ago, none really from the present day. He also mentioned that the ghost storm is sometimes associated with death. Kinda like a banshee, I guess? For you clueless fuckers, people claim to hear the screech of a banshee, then later someone dies. I mentioned this to the old man. Suggest that maybe the ghost storm is some sort of electrical phenomena. Maybe Europeans experienced it when they came over. Associated the loud noise with the banshee from back home. And boom, you've got the local legend he describes. I pat myself on the back for solving the mystery. But the guy says no. According to him, the legend goes back to a meeting between the Osage and the Cherokee. He tells me that he's actually part of the Osage Nation. His grandpa told him the legend as a kid. He used to tell it to us every year, he says, then he'd tell us about his own experiences. Okay, no more Snoresville. I love Native history and I especially love Native lore. I ask if he'd mind telling me his grandpa's stories. He's reluctant at first. It's really long, he says, there's kind of a lot to it. I tell him it's my day off, so I've got nothing but time. I have to prod him a bit, but he finally agrees. So he hobbles over to my booth, introduces himself as Frank, and slides into the seat across from me. Then he begins to tell me a crazy fucking story. It's got a lot of history, a bit of folklore, and a nice little murder mystery too. And it goes a little something like this. Cue Native American drums. The Osage were once considered to one of the fiercest Native American tribes. At upwards of 6, they were much taller than most Europeans. And they loved raiding. Early on in American history, the fur trappers who were drawn near the Osage territories were constantly attacked and killed. The United States decides that it's time to stop playing around. So they arm the enemies of the Osage and encourage them to go to battle with each other. A series of intertribal skirmishes follow. Eventually the raids are quelled and the Osage are pacified. They ultimately sign a series of treaties with the US. And that, my friends, is the beginning of dark times for the Osage people. Soon after signing away their traditional lands, smallpox ravages the tribe. Right around this time, the US tells them, "You guys gotta skedaddle, we need more room for white settlers." Most of the Osage lay dead or dying. The rest are forcibly moved out west into Cherokee territory where the survivors make rough camps. The land's not very good for farming. The Osage begin to starve. Then the American Civil War breaks out. At the same time, the Cherokee and the Creek are vying for control over native tribal politics. They fight bloody battles against each other. The Osage are right in the middle of all of this, surrounded by war and starving to death. As if to add insult to injury, the United States never paid them what they were owed for their traditional lands. This once proud tribe of fierce warriors doesn't even have a place that they can call their own. When the wars were over, the Osage sent a delegation to Washington, D.C. They plead their case. They beg the United States to honor its debt, and to pay the Osage what they're owed for giving up their ancestral home. Congress debates the matter. And they decide the Osage have a point. A resolution is passed. The U.S. honors its debt and pays the Osage in full. The tribe is saved. But they still need a home. The Osage decide they'll use some of the money they receive to purchase the piece of the Cherokee reservation that they've been occupying all this time. But the Cherokee are hesitant to sell. They tell the Osage a really weird story. The land they're attempting to buy is home to a mysterious spirit. The Cherokee encountered it during the famous Trail of Tears. They heard it passing overhead one day, like thunder. It seemed to be following them. Its presence was like the roar of a river, and it scared the people. But their medicine man assured them. "It's just an old spirit," he said, "it doesn't like being disturbed." They asked him what sort of spirit it was. "It protects the land, and it is the land," he said. He told them all to keep marching and to stay out of its way, and it would leave them alone. The medicine man was old, and he died not long after that. But the Cherokee did as he said. They kept away from the place where the spirit was most often heard. Over time, they simply stopped speaking of it altogether. The elders broke this taboo to warn the Osage. The land they were trying to purchase, that's where the spirit lived. Obviously the Osage are a little scared by this. But they're also not deterred. They've been living on that land now for quite a while, and they've never encountered the spirit the Cherokee speak of. Besides, they need a home, and they don't know what else to do. They insist on purchasing the land, and the Cherokee eventually sell. The Osage reservation is born. And they lived happily ever after, right? Yeah, not exactly. Settlers continued to push further west. The Osage were concerned that ultimately they'd be shoved off their land again. The elders came together for a meeting to decide what to do. It's during this meeting, according to legend, that a spirit appeared to them. It was just how the Cherokee described it. The spirit's presence was like the roaring of a river. The spirit told the Osage that dark days still lay ahead. That their home would be occupied by foreigners. That the land would be ripped apart and ravaged. It told them that it had watched over this place for a very long time, guarding it. But its time was coming to an end. It told the elders that they would need to watch over the land themselves now. And in exchange for taking on this burden, the spirit would reveal something to them that would allow the Osage to maintain control over their home. So the elders listened as the spirit explained everything. When it was finished, the spirit told them that it would always be there in the land, and that the Osage needed to remember it. Then it left. The sound of the roaring river left with it. The Osage leaders were amazed. One more time, they sent a delegation to Washington, D.C. This time they didn't go to beg and plead. They went to negotiate. Following the spirit's advice, they sacrificed their land. They opened it for outsiders to use on the condition that the Osage would retain the rights to the subsurface of their reservation. The federal government agreed and passed a resolution sealing the deal. The terms laid out by the Osage meant that any minerals that might be discovered on their land, tin, gold, whatever, belonged to the Osage people. And as it turned out, their reservation was sitting on a gold mine. Not literal gold. Black gold. One of the largest oil deposits in the entire United States. The Osage Nation was rich. The riches were evenly divided among the tribal members. Every Osage man and woman was given an equal share of the oil. This equal share was called a head right. Upon death, one's head right would go to the next of kin. Everything changed for the Osage overnight. Luxury cars and chauffeurs, fine clothes, you name it. And that's where Daryl comes in. Frank tells me that lifestyle attracted some real bad people. My grandpa told me all about it. Daryl, Frank's grandpa, lived next door to a woman named Anna. She was a friendly, talkative lady, nice as could be. She was also Daryl's closest friend. Normally, she'd be out in the yard tending her garden. But one day Daryl doesn't see her all day. He doesn't find this odd at first. He knows for a fact that Anna went to her sister's house the night before. Usually she's back the same night, but maybe she stayed. But a couple of days pass and Anna's still not back. Daryl's worried. He decides to pay Anna's sister a visit to make sure everything's okay. She was here the other night, Anna's sister tells Daryl, but she left. I thought she went home. Now Daryl's really worried. He suspects the worst. He marches up to the sheriff's office and reports Anna missing. A few days later, Anna is found. Or rather, her body is. Down in a gulch, gunshot to the back of the head. Daryl and Anna's sister go down to identify the body together. It's hard on both of them. For days afterward, Daryl can't get the image out of his head. Anna's lifeless face. She actually looked at peace. He thinks about Anna's final moments, imagining what it must have been like for her. He weeps. And that's just the beginning. When Anna's body is found, her head right goes to her mother. But 2 months later, her mother turns up dead too. Even stranger, the sheriff's office has ruled Anna's death as accidental. Accidental, my ass, thinks Daryl. She had a bullet hole in her head. Daryl knows there was foul play, but can he prove it? And who would want to kill Anna and her mother anyway? It suddenly dawns on him. Maybe Anna was killed for her head right. Head rights go to next of kin. Maybe someone in her family is trying to cash in on that oil money. But this theory doesn't seem to pan out. First of all, Anna's cousin winds up dead, so that means no head right for him. Then, Anna's sister dies. Her house blows up in a freak accident and kills her instantly. Her husband succumbs to his injuries days later. No head right for either of them. Later, Daryl learns that the freak accident was no accident at all. Police discovered a bomb had been planted under the house. The evidence is piling up for Daryl. This is serial murder, plain and simple. What he can figure out is who might be behind it. It's beginning to drive him a little crazy. He goes up to Anna's sister's house one day and just stands there staring at the rubble. But all he can see is the image of Anna's lifeless body in his mind. And that's the first time he hears it. He's crying as a thunderstorm approaches. He barely notices as the sound of it passes over him. He feels a sensation like something soft brushing past his face, and he looks up. He hears the rain all around him, only there's no rain. He listens as the thunderstorm passes overhead. Then it's all quiet again. Daryl is stunned. He takes it as a sign. Anna's spirit is restless. She's calling him to do something so that she can be at peace. Daryl marches up to the sheriff's office. He volunteers to help with the investigation. Says he can help make phone calls, dig through the files, whatever they need. But the sheriff tells Daryl that his grief will only get in the way. Go home and let us do our job. The sheriff stares him right in the eye as he says, I don't want you getting yourself hurt. It comes off as a threat. Daryl reluctantly leaves. But he's paying close attention now. He's paying attention when the sheriff's office arrests a man in connection to the deaths. He's paying attention when the man is released. No charges. Daryl asks around. Nobody really knows much about this man. He's not Osage. There are rumors he's affiliated with some local gangs, but nothing concrete. Daryl's paying attention to the papers too. An Osage man, unrelated to Anna, is found shot dead in his car. Another found poisoned on a train. Daryl's not the only one paying attention now. He's been going around asking questions. Other tribal members notice. They think, what if he's right? They begin to fear what Daryl suspected all along. Someone is targeting the Osage for their head rights. Nobody is safe. Then, as if to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, the son of an Osage chief dies. His name was George Big Heart, and he was poisoned. Doctors call it accidental poisoning, whatever that means. Big Heart dies in a crowded ward in an Oklahoma City hospital. But luckily, not before making a call. He was frantic on the phone, telling his attorney that he had damning evidence linking someone to the murders on the reservation. The specifics of their conversation are unknown. But whatever Big Heart said, the attorney came away spooked. He rang the sheriff's office immediately. Hospital staff recall him speaking angrily into the phone. The attorney informed the sheriff's office that he was currently in possession of certain documents provided to him by Big Heart. They were related to the murders. The attorney intended to raise a big stink over it. He got off the phone and hopped on a train bound for the reservation. He carried a briefcase with him. He was going to meet with the sheriff in person. Unfortunately, the attorney never made it. His body was found tossed off the train, his skull bashed in. The briefcase was missing. By this point, Daryl's at his wit's end. He knows whoever killed Anna is still out there, and they're going to keep killing unless somebody does something. Well, somebody tries. It seems the mysterious deaths attract some attention. A group of well-dressed white men arrive on the reservation. They claim to work for a little government outfit called the Bureau of Investigation, later to become the FBI. Right away, it's clear that there's tension between the sheriff's office and the Bureau boys. There's never any public statement made about this, of course. But rumors spread. The sheriff's office is stonewalling the investigation, people say. Someone was found destroying evidence. Documents. There's another rumor too. The non-Osage man that the sheriff's office originally arrested. The one who was never charged. People say he made a confession while in custody. In his confession, he implicated a man named Bill Hale. According to this man, Hale offered him money to kill Anna and her family. This revelation stuns Daryl. It stuns everyone, actually. Bill Hale is no obscure figure. He's a white man who's lived on the reservation for decades. Whereas the Osage tribe became wealthy overnight through their oil reserves, Hale earned his fortune slowly over time through the cattle trade. He's known to be shrewd, stubborn, and tough. People say he's got every local politician in his back pocket. Tribal law enforcement too. He's been accused of crimes before but never faced any jail time. If Hale was indeed involved in Anna's death, it would explain why the sheriff's office is stonewalling the Bureau boys. It might explain what George Big Heart knew too, and why he was poisoned. It would also explain the sheriff's odd warning to Daryl. I don't want you getting yourself hurt. It's not perfect, but at least now Daryl's got a theory. Hale is attempting to increase his fortune by going after people's head rights. He's hiring men to do his killing for him. Maybe he's even got people on the inside too, family members that he splits the oil money with. The sheriff's office knows something about this. But are they really in on the murders? Or are their hands simply tied by Bill Hale's power and influence? It doesn't really matter. Daryl's been looking for a fight, for a way to make himself feel like he's bringing Anna's killer to justice. It's decided. Bill Hale is behind the murders, that's all there is to it. Law enforcement is either protecting the cattleman, or they're afraid to go after him. Either way, Daryl has no choice. He's got to take the law into his own hands. Daryl imagines Hale ordering Anna's murder. He thinks of the sign he received from Anna that day at Anna's sister's house. These things cloud his mind. It's late in the day when he's driving home from work. The sun is setting when he enters his house to grab his gun. The reservation is dark as he marches towards Bill Hale's ranch. He's all alone. In the distance, a storm is coming. Hiking up a small hill that overlooks Hale's ranch, Daryl can make out 4 men who appear to be guarding the entrance. They're all armed. But Daryl doesn't care. He isn't thinking anymore. From where he's standing, he can see the main house on the ranch. Bill Hale's probably in there right now. He has his wife and children around him. They're all alive, and Anna's dead. Daryl makes his way down the hill. Like a possessed man, he marches towards his own death. The men guarding the entrance don't notice him at first. He manages to get pretty close before they do. One of the men shouts a warning. Tells Daryl he's approaching private property. The man draws his weapon. Shouts another warning. Daryl is almost at the gate now. He lifts his gun. Fires off 2 shots. Hits one man square in the chest, another in the arm. They both drop to the ground. The 2 men left standing draw their weapons and fire at Daryl. But he rushes behind a large barn. The sound of approaching rain is momentarily drowned out by the hail of gunfire. Daryl is cornered here, and he knows it. The moment that he steps out from around the barn, the men will unload their pistols. But he's not giving up. The plan was to reach the main house. Daryl's not going to stop till he gets there. Daryl's going to make Bill Hale pay. He readies himself to face the 2 men. He thinks, this is it. That's when the storm comes in. Its roar spreads over the ranch. It sounds like rain, but there's not a drop in sight. Daryl feels the familiar sensation of something brushing past his face. On the other side of the barn, the men are shouting. They fire off a few rounds. But at what? The storm sound is almost deafening now. There's more shouting, but the gunshots have stopped. Daryl peeks out. The men are racing towards the main house. The air is filled with the hissing sound of a heavy rain. Daryl's eyes are drawn to the first 2 men he shot. They're lying on the ground. Daryl goes over and kneels beside them. The one he shot in the chest is obviously dead. But the one he shot in the arm, what happened to him? His face is swollen and purple, like he took a severe beating. He's not breathing. In the distance, the shouts of the men have become screams of agony. Daryl is frightened. What the hell is going on here? Somehow, in the midst of his fear, the image of Anna flashes in his mind. He looks at the 2 men he killed. The feeling of guilt overwhelms him. His fingers go numb, and he drops his gun. He scrambles to his feet and hurries away from the ranch. As he races home, he continues to hear the roar of a storm in the distance. And just under that, he can just make out the men's agonized screams. The next day, when Daryl wakes up, there's one thought on his mind. What the hell happened last night? He's not sure how to explain it. It's the same thing he experienced at Anna's sister's house, but more intense. It felt angry. Was it Anna's spirit? Or something else? Whatever it was, it saved Daryl's life. If it hadn't shown up when it did, Daryl would have stepped out from behind that barn and Hale's men would have filled him full of bullets. As he's thinking this, he remembers. I left my gun at the ranch last night. His heart sinks. The sheriff's office will find his gun. Or maybe the bureau boys will, it doesn't matter. They'll trace it back to Daryl. Then they'll haul him off to prison. For a brief moment, Daryl considers skipping town. But instead he sits down and waits to be arrested. Maybe it's the guilt from killing those 2 men. Maybe it's the fact that he failed Anna. He was supposed to bring her justice. Whatever the reason, he sits there and waits for the authorities. While he waits, he picks up a book and begins to read. It's a book on Osage history. It's as he's reading it that he remembers a weird legend. A story about how the Osage bought their land from the Cherokee. and how the Cherokee warned them about a spirit that resided on the land. He remembers the description of it. A roaring like a river. Is this what he heard? According to the stories, the spirit went away, never to return. Did it come back last night for some reason? And if so, why? A squad car rolls up to Daryl's house right about then. It's the sheriff. He's alone. He calls Daryl over and says, "We heard there was a gunfight out on Bill Hale's property last night." Daryl is silent. He sees his gun sitting in the sheriff's passenger seat. 4 men are dead, sheriff says, 1 man shot through the chest, 3 bludgeoned to death. Daryl thinks about the man with the swollen face. Were the other 2 men also found this way? That's 4 murders total. The sheriff should be arresting him by now. But instead he grabs Daryl's gun and hands it to him. Unfortunately, no evidence was found linking anyone to the crime. Daryl doesn't move. The sheriff forces the gun into Daryl's hand. "Be careful out there," he say, "whoever killed those men hasn't been caught. I don't need anybody else getting hurt." Before he leaves, he says one last thing. "I'm going to make things right." Then the sheriff pulls out of the driveway and drives away. Not long afterwards, Bill Hale is arrested. The Bureau boys were able to put a case together with the sheriff's help. The reservation breathes a collective sigh of relief. The murders have come to an end. Later, Daryl learns that Hale won't be charged for Anna's murder. There's too much missing evidence for that. But the Bureau was able to link Hale to the murder of Anna's cousin. He'll face life in prison for it. It's not exactly justice for Anna, but Daryl accepts it. A year later, he's visiting Anna's grave. It's the first time he's seen her stone. He realizes that all this time, he hasn't actually been looking to find peace for Anna's spirit. He never accepted her death. He didn't know how to let her go. So he wasn't able to find peace within himself. Seeing her grave makes it real for the first time. Daryl breaks down in tears. In the distance, a storm approaches. It rumbles over the country. It rolls over the cemetery. It passes over Daryl. As he cries, he feels the raindrops falling from the sky. They land on his hands. They cover him completely. When the storm passes, he's all out of tears. "That's a hell of a story," I tell Frank. I can't think of anything else to say. Frank says his grandpa used to sit him down every spring and tell that story. Always in the spring, he said, because that's when Anna died. Later in his life, Frank wondered if his grandpa made the whole thing up. He read everything he could on Osage history. In his readings, he came upon something. They call it the Osage Reign of Terror. A string of murders linked to the Osage head rights. Most of the information Frank found matches the story his grandpa told him. Some things never turned up though. He could never find anything about the Cherokees believing in a spirit that lived on the Osage reservation, or of the meeting between the Cherokee elders and the Osage. But he grew up hearing stories about the ghost storm from people in town. His grandpa used to tell him that was the same spirit he encountered, it was just weaker now. I ask Frank if he believes that. Frank shrugs. "If you heard my grandpa tell it, you'd believe it too." After that, Frank and I parted ways. But I'm going to be honest. His story hit me later that night. Hard. I was just standing in the doorway of my motel, staring out at the field across the parking lot. I had work the next day and I needed to get to bed. But I ended up daydreaming for a long time. I thought about the Osage marching through that field, starving, looking for a place to stay. I thought about the sheriff finding Anna's body out there. I thought about Frank's grandpa marching through the night to avenge his friend. It made me think. When I first saw the field, I thought it was dry and ugly. But some people spent their lives on that land. They killed and died for it. It's crazy that we'll never even know the half of it. Anyway, good night, /x/. I hope you sleep well tonight.